Our next lecture is on the Communist Manifesto. I like to call this one the Gospel according to Marx. This is one of my favorite lectures, but it's pretty intensive. Marx, for a couple of reasons, is kind of heavy and difficult to understand if you don't have a really strong background in philosophy and economics. So a lot of what I do in this lecture is sort of try to translate Marxism for you. Before I get started talking about Marx, though, I do want to talk a little bit about where the course goes from the rest of the semester on. So what we theme our questions around human nature in Westminster 2, and starting in the second half of the course, we really look at this like expanding definition of what it means to be a human. So before Darwin, really, all of human existence was bound up in the idea that man was different from animals, that we were somehow special. So I have this drawing here of the great chain of being, and you see these little steps leading up to the castle, right? And at the top of the top step is Deus, right, which is God, and then you have angels, and then something in the middle there, but right below that is man, right? And then you have the beasts and the plants, right? And so again, I mean, Darwin was so controversial because he challenged the idea that we were different from animals, so it totally broke this whole great chain of being into little pieces. Because now the distinction between animal and man is blurred. And that actually is what creates the space for this new expanding definition of humankind. So anytime we talked about humans before now, we were basically talking about white upper class dudes. Descartes, for example, right? And even Rousseau. And a lot of these people, for a long time, viewed others as subhuman. If you weren't white, if you were a woman, right? If you were lower class. And now, that Enlightenment picture of humanity is really going to start to erode with the next set of readings we do, from Marx to Du Bois to Virginia Woolf. The essential questions we deal with for the Communist Manifesto are the following. What is man's relationship to the work that he does? Because above all, this is a text about work. It's about the fact that we are humans, and if you believe in, the story from the book of Genesis, we have been condemned to toil the earth, right? Adam, that's his punishment for sinning in the Garden of Eden. So we have to work. We're stuck working. So what kind of relationship do we have with our work, and what kind of relationship should we have with our work? And then, this very big question is whether a capitalist system is the best economic system for all people, and whether it accurately describes the ideal relationship between individuals and their work. That's a giant question. Actually, all of these questions are really big. That's why Marx can be so difficult, because we're really trying to answer these big questions. Marxism has been kind of characterized in the same way religion has, for a couple of reasons. And I think this is a really unique way of looking at Marxism, and I like this framing of it, which is why I talk about this. Even though you might say, like, a secular religion, that doesn't make any sense. That's self-contradictory. Marxism can be seen like religion because of the kinds of basic questions it tries to answer and the kinds of answers it gives. So Marxism, for example, includes a theory of how evil came into the world and how it will ultimately be eliminated, right? So if you're looking at the Hebrew scriptures, evil is sin, right? Or if you're looking at the New Testament, evil is the devil. How is evil going to be eliminated? Turn right to the book of Revelation and you'll find it. For Marx, evil is greed. It's humans not being able to realize their full potential, not having the correct relationship with other humans and the work that they do. It's ultimately going to be eliminated through revolution. Just like religion, we get this vision of powers that are beyond man's control and inflict suffering upon him. I always think of the book of Job here, right? Because that whole book is about, a man suffering and not being able to understand why. He hasn't done anything wrong. Yet the whole point of the book of Job is, hey, that's in God's hands and you don't even get to ask. The powers that are beyond man's control in Marx's world are the powers of economics, which I'll explain in a minute here. And we also get this prophecy of a final paradise, where humanity, it will ultimately live in freedom and perfect happiness. For Marx, that's communism. For Judeo-Christianity, that's paradise, heaven. It's difficult to approach Marx without addressing a couple of big misconceptions first, though. And the first one to understand is that the Communist Manifesto, the little pamphlet that you read part of, is actually not the best version of Marx's philosophy. It's like a pamphlet, right? It's like something someone would hand to you on Wesco Beach when they were yelling at you to believe whatever they were saying. So it's very rhetorical, and it doesn't have a lot of sustained analysis, which is why I fill in a lot of gaps here. Anyone that says a communist refers to a communist government, that's a misnomer, because communism and free market capitalism are economic theories. Marx actually believes that the need for the state will melt away when we achieve communism, so there's no such thing as a communist government. That's something that cannot exist. Another thing to think about is that Marxism and socialism and communism are not the same thing, right? So socialism is a step on the way to communism, and I'll show you that in a second. Marxists are a class of people. Marx is one of them, right? But there are contemporary writers who are Marxists as well. And the USSR did not achieve any of those things. Neither did, allegedly, communist China. Marx actually tells us that communism couldn't happen in Russia because they don't follow the steps. So what happens in Russia is totalitarianism. The same thing happens in China. So we've actually never realized communism. Even you might say, well, what about Cuba? It's not there, right? It just, Marxist theory hasn't been fully put into action on Earth yet. So it's really difficult to say communism doesn't work when we haven't really tried it yet. If we were going to boil down Marxist theory to like 4 big points, I would say that they are the following. First and foremost, when we're talking about the pre-communist period, and I'll show you this little diagram here in a minute, the economic structure of society evolves independently of human will. We can't plan it, we can't control it. It is something that operates kind of like gravity, right? Except we're talking about objective social laws here and not like natural laws. But basically, whatever we think we're doing to manipulate the economy, we're not doing actually anything. The second big piece of Marxism is that whatever goes on within the economic sphere actually determines what takes place in other spheres of social life. So it doesn't just affect class structure, but it affects our government. It affects the laws that are passed, and it affects the religion that we subscribe to. It affects the sermon that we hear on Sunday, and it affects our ethics and our morality, right? So capitalism is kind of like a disease that infiltrates all parts of our life. Point number 3 is it's important, but we're not going to deal with it too much. But Marx basically says history consists of a bunch of revolutions, and when we have a revolution, we transition to a more advanced stage of development. And then finally, all of this is going to end someday. Man will be delivered from their slavery to one another, and they will be delivered toward freedom. So one thing that's really important to understand about Marx is that he has this teleological view of history, and basically that history goes through stages, and that there's an end, right? That's what teleology means. That it's goal oriented or headed towards some kind of goal. Marx says, we began by sustaining ourselves within these primitive communal societies, right? Family units and tribes, until we gradually transitioned to the large scale slaveholding societies. And we're talking about ancient Greece there, right? Ancient Rome, stuff like that. The Etruscans had slaves. We moved from slaveholding societies into feudalism, which was not a huge leap because feudalism is basically just slavery under a different name. And then from feudalism, we moved to capitalism. Now, depending on your interpretation, we are either currently in step 4 or in step 4.5. You cannot transition directly from capitalism to socialism or to communism. So you need that intermediary step in there. But at the end of history, that's where we arrive at communism. So then history is this teleological series of events. So you have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Also, the other thing to understand here is that it's deterministic. So history cannot unfold another way. It's not like you could jump straight from a primitive communal society into capitalism. It just doesn't work that way. So Marx's view is teleological, and we also refer to it as a historical materialistic view. So that just says what I've kind of already said before, that human history is fueled through changes in the basic ways that people have sustained themselves. So are we talking about hunter-gatherer, little small tribal societies, and that's how we function and live and get nourishment and shelter and stuff like that? Or are we talking about a feudal economy? I'll stop here, and then in the next set of slides, we will talk about the three main aspects of Marxist theory.